Dr. Hyunwoo Kim wiped the sweat from his forehead as he worked on the sensor equipment. The research ship Sanctuary's light moved slowly through space near the Kepler 442 system. For 3 long months, he and his team had been studying tiny life forms in the far corners of the galaxy. It was quiet work, but important. The ship was small compared to military vessels. It had basic living quarters, a simple lab, and communication equipment that barely worked on good days. Kim's team of 5 scientists shared cramped spaces and ate recycled food. They were far from home, far from comfort, but they loved there. Work. Kim adjusted another sensor when bright lights suddenly flashed across the communication panel. The emergency beacon made loud beeping sounds that echoed through the quiet ship. "Captain," called Specialist Jiho Park from his seat at the communications desk. His voice shook with worry. "We're getting a distress signal. It's coming from many different frequencies at once." Park was young, maybe 25, with nervous hands that always moved when he was scared. He had joined the research team only 6 months ago, fresh from the academy. This was his first time seeing a real emergency signal. Kim walked over quickly. "Where is it coming from?" Park's fingers moved across his controls, checking and double-checking the information. "Sir, it's from the Yelani Republic." Kim felt his stomach drop. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Yelani. They were gentle people who spent their time studying medicine and philosophy. For over 2,000 years, they had never fought a war. They didn't even have weapons. Instead, they had created amazing medical technology that had saved millions of lives across dozens of different worlds. The Yelani looked like tall, thin humans, but with pale blue skin and large, kind eyes. They spoke softly and moved gracefully. Their cities were beautiful, filled with gardens and libraries. Children from many different species went to Yelani schools to learn about peace and healing. Static filled the air as Park turned up the volume. Then a voice came through, weak and full of fear. "This is Elder Teshvara of Haven's Rest Colony. The Carrick's Dominion has begun systematic attacks on our worlds. We cannot fight them, our people know only peace. 17 systems have already fallen. Our children are being taken as slaves. Please, if anyone receives this message," the voice cut off suddenly, leaving only the sound of empty space. The bridge fell silent. Kim looked around at his crew. Navigator Sujin Lee sat frozen at her station, her face white with shock. Engineer Duhayan Choi had stopped working and was staring at the communication panel. Even Dr. Yoonji Song, who usually stayed focused on her biological samples, had come out of the lab to listen. 17 systems, whispered Lee. That's millions of people. Kim knew about the Carrick's Dominion, too. They were the opposite of the Yelani in every way. The Carricks were warriors who believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. They had dark, thick skin like armor and sharp teeth. Their ships were black and covered with weapons. They took what they wanted and destroyed what they couldn't use. The Carricks made slaves of weaker species. They forced prisoners to work in dangerous mines, digging for rare metals and crystals. Many slaves died from the hard work and poor conditions. The Carricks didn't care. They could always capture more. Sir Lee said quietly, "I've found the coordinates from that transmission. Haven's Rest Colony is only 6 light years from here." Kim stared at the star chart on Lee's screen. 6 light years was close in space terms. Their jump drive, they could be there in less than a day. But Kim knew that going there would break many rules. They were researchers, not rescue workers. Their orders were to study microbes, not investigate military attacks. The Galactic Research Council had been very clear about this. Research ships were not supposed to get involved in conflicts between different species. They were supposed to stay neutral and focus on science. If Kim took his ship to Haven's Rest, he could lose his job. His crew could be punished too, but Kim couldn't stop thinking about that voice. Elder Teshvara had sounded so desperate, so hopeless. The Yelani were peaceful people who had never hurt anyone. They had spent centuries helping others, sharing their medical knowledge freely. They were being attacked by monsters and no one was helping them. Captain Park said softly, "What should we do?" Kim looked at each member of his crew. Park was young and scared but ready to help. Lee was brave and skilled at navigation. Choi could keep their ship running no matter what happened. Song was brilliant and cared deeply about all living things. They were good people, all of them. Communication system is still working, right? Kim asked. Yes, sir, Park replied. Kim made his decision. He knew it might be wrong. He knew it could get them all in trouble. But sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. Prep the jump drive, he ordered quietly. We're going to take a look. The crew moved quickly to prepare their ship for the journey ahead, not knowing they were about to witness something that would change the galaxy forever. The Asterisk Sanctuaries. Light Asterisk shook as it came out of hyperspace. Dr. Kim grabbed his chair to steady himself as the ship's engines stopped their loud humming. Outside the windows, stars appeared where there had been only the strange colors of hyperspace travel. But what Kim and his crew saw next made them all stop breathing. Huge black ships moved slowly between the planets like giant sharks in dark water. The Carix dreadnoughts were 3 times bigger than any ship Kim had ever seen. Their metal hulls were covered with weapon ports that looked like angry eyes. Red lights blinked along their sides, and their engines glowed like fire. Oh no, whispered Navigator Sujin Lee. Her hands shook as she counted the enemy ships on her screen. There are at least 20 of them. Kim looked at the planet that should have been Haven's Rest. Once it had been covered with beautiful white cities that sparkled in the sunlight. The Yilani built their homes to look like flowers and trees, with curved walls and gardens on every roof. From space, their cities had looked like jewels scattered across green landscapes. Now, thick black smoke rose from burning ruins. Where gardens had grown, only gray ash remained. The pretty white buildings were broken and dark. Some areas glowed red with fires that were still burning. Scanning for life signs, said Specialist Duhaen Choi. His voice was tight with fear as his fingers moved quickly across the sensor controls. The equipment hummed and clicked as it searched for any signs of living beings on the planet below. Kim watched the numbers appear on Choi's screen. There were still Yilani alive down there, but something was wrong with where they were located. I'm detecting Yilani biosignatures, Choi reported slowly, but they're all concentrated in containment facilities. The words hit Kim like a punch in the stomach. Slave camps. He had heard stories about Carix slave camps. They were terrible places where prisoners were forced to work 20 hours a day digging in dangerous mines. The camps had no windows, little food, and guards who beat anyone who moved too slowly. Many prisoners died within months from exhaustion and disease. Suddenly, a very weak signal reached their ship. It was so quiet that Park almost missed it among all the space noise. Captain, I'm getting a transmission from the planet's surface. It's heavily encrypted and coming from underground. Put it through, Kim ordered. A tired voice filled their bridge. It belonged to Elder Yethkol, one of the Yilani leaders who had survived the attack. His words came through bursts of static, but Kim could hear the sadness and fear in every sentence. We tried to surrender immediately, the Elder explained. We told them we had no weapons, no armies. We offered to share our medical knowledge, our food, anything they wanted, but they laughed at us. The Elder's voice broke as he continued. The Carix said we were weak. They said weak creatures deserved to be slaves. They herded our people into transport ships like animals. Families were separated. Children were crying for their parents. Kim felt sick listening to the story. The Yilani were the kindest people in the galaxy. They'd never hurt anyone. Their doctors traveled to dangerous worlds to help victims of wars and diseases. They gave their medicine away for free to anyone who needed it. How many worlds have fallen? Kim asked quietly. 17 systems in just 4 weeks, Yethkol replied. Millions of our people are now working in their mines. The Carix move fast. They attack before anyone can send for help. By the time other species hear about it, it's too late. The bridge was silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Kim's crew looked shocked and angry. Engineer Song had tears in her eyes. Park was clenching his fists so hard his knuckles were white. Elder Kim said carefully, What about the Galactic Defense Force? Surely they will come to help. Yethkol's laugh was bitter and sad. The Defense Force is busy with border disputes in the Outer Rim. They say they cannot spare ships for every local conflict. Besides, by the time they organize a response, The Karex will be gone with our people. Kim understood. The galaxy was huge, and there were always small wars happening somewhere. The major powers didn't want to get involved unless their own interests were threatened. The Yolani were peaceful and had no valuable resources except their medical knowledge, and nobody would risk a war to save them. Their legends, Yethkol whispered through the static. His voice became even quieter, as if he was afraid someone might hear. Old stories about a warrior species called humans. They say these beings fought wars that made no sense, battles that should have been impossible to win. They were small and weak compared to their enemies, but they never gave up. Kim felt his heart start beating faster. Everyone in the galaxy knew those stories. The legends say humans could turn any object into a weapon, Yethkol continued. They fought with such fury that even stronger species learned to fear them. But most people believe they destroyed themselves long ago in nuclear wars. Kim looked around at his crew. He was staring at him with wide eyes. Park had stopped breathing. They all knew the truth that most of the galaxy had forgotten. Elder Kim said carefully, "Those humans, ... they still exist. And if anyone can help you, it might be them." Dr. Kim stood in the middle of his ship's bridge, staring at the communication equipment. His hands were shaking slightly as he thought about what he was going to do. Around him, his crew waited quietly, watching his face for any sign of his decision. Breaking the rules of the Galactic Research Council was serious business. His ships had been destroyed for less. Captains had been sent to prison for disobeying orders. But Kim couldn't stop thinking about Elder Yethkol's voice, full of pain and hopelessness. "Park," he said finally, his voice steady despite his fear. "I want you to take that Yolani distress signal and send it toward the Sol system." Communication Specialist Jiho Park's face went pale. His young hands stopped moving over his controls. "Sir, the Sol system has been marked as a restricted zone. No contact has been authorized since they nearly burned half the Centauri sector fighting a war everyone said they couldn't win." Kim finished the sentence. He had studied that war in school like every person in the galaxy. Do it. Park looked around at the other crew members, hoping someone would tell him this was a bad idea. But Navigator Lee nodded at him encouragingly. Engineer Choi gave him a thumbs up. Dr. Song just whispered, "Those poor Yolani children need help." The Sol system was 37 light-years away from their current position. It was surrounded by warning beacons that told all ships to stay away. The area had been declared off-limits after the Human-Centauri Wars ended 30 years ago. Most people in the galaxy remembered that war as the craziest conflict in history. The Centauri Empire had been 10 times bigger than humanity. They had better weapons, more ships, and thousands of years of military experience. When they decided to conquer Earth, everyone expected the humans to surrender quickly. Instead, the humans fought like wild animals. They used tactics that made no sense. They turned civilian ships into bombs. They hid weapons inside medical supplies. They pretended to surrender, then attacked when the enemy got close. They fought battles in spacesuits with nothing but hand tools. When their ships were destroyed, the war should have lasted weeks. Instead, it went on for 7 years. The Centauri won most of the battles, but they never managed to defeat the humans completely. Every time they thought they had won, or human ships would appear from nowhere and attack again. In the end, both sides were so damaged that they agreed to stop fighting. The humans were locked in their home system, and the Centauri Empire fell apart from exhaustion. Most people thought the humans had probably killed themselves with nuclear weapons after the war ended. Park's hands moved slowly over his controls. "Sending the transmission now, sir." The message left their ship at faster than light speed, carrying Elder Teshvara's desperate plea across the dark emptiness of space toward Earth. Kim wondered if anyone would even receive it. Maybe the humans really were dead. Maybe their planet was just a ball of radioactive dust orbiting a lonely star. For 18 long hours, there was nothing but silence. Kim tried to sleep but couldn't. He walked around his small ship, checking equipment that didn't need checking. His crew was nervous too. They spoke in whispers and jumped at every small sound. Even the ship's computer seemed quieter than usual. Then, without warning, Their communication system came alive. The voice that filled their bridge was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its coldness. Research Vessel Sanctuary's Light. This is Admiral Minho Chang, Earth Defense Force. Message received and acknowledged. Kim felt his heart stop. The humans were alive. They had not only survived their quarantine, but they still had a military. Admiral Chang's voice continued without any emotion, like he was reading a shopping list instead of responding to a cry for help. Instruct all Yolani survivors to mark safe zones with bright thermal signatures and maintain distance from Carrick's installations. The 7th Fleet is en route. Estimated arrival, 72 hours. Before Kim could respond, another voice cut through on a different channel. This one belonged to a woman, and it was filled with deadly promise. Research Vessel, this is Captain Su-Young Wang speaking from the flagship Soul's Wrath. Tell the Yolani to take cover and stay hidden. When we arrive, anything between us and the Carrocks dies. The communication ended as suddenly as it had begun. Leaving Kim's bridge in complete silence, Park was staring at his equipment like it might explode. Sir, did they just say they're coming here to fight the Carrocks? That's exactly what they said, Kim replied quietly. Engineer Choi shook his head in amazement. The 7th Fleet? That sounds like a lot of ships. It is, said Dr. Song, who had been studying her tablet. I've been reading about human military organization. Fleet usually means at least 20 warships, plus support vessels. Kim felt a chill run down his spine. In 72 hours, this quiet corner of space was going to become a battlefield. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had been both feared and respected. The Carrocks had no idea what was coming for them. He opened a channel to Elder Yethkal. Elder, help is on the way. Tell your people to hide and mark their locations with heat sources. And Elder, you might want to pray to whatever gods the Yolani believe in. The space around Haven's Rest had been quiet for 3 days. The Carrack ships moved slowly between the planets, their crews relaxed and confident, and they had faced no real resistance from anyone. The Yolani had surrendered without firing a single shot. No other species had come to help. The Carrack's commanders were already planning which planets to attack next. Then the fabric of space itself seemed to tear open. Dr. Kim watched from his hidden position behind Haven's Rest's largest moon as 27 human warships appeared all at once. But they didn't arrive the way other species traveled through space. Most civilized fleets came out of hyperspace in neat lines, like soldiers on parade. They positioned themselves carefully and politely before doing anything else. The human ships came like a pack of hungry wolves. They appeared in a circle around the Carrack's fleet, surrounding them completely before the enemy even knew what was happening. Some ships came from above, others from below. A few materialized so close to Carrack's vessels that their hulls almost touched. Kim had never seen ships like these before. While other species built their vessels to look beautiful and impressive, these human ships looked like they had been built for only one purpose: killing. Their hulls were dark gray metal, scarred with old battle damage that had never been repaired. Strange weapons stuck out from every surface. Some of the ships had holes in their armor that had been patched with different colored metal. They look like they've been fighting for 30 years, whispered Navigator Lee. They probably have, Kim replied. The largest human ship was called Soul's Wrath. It was smaller than the biggest Carrack's dreadnought, but something about it made Kim's skin crawl. It moved through space like a predator, smooth and silent and deadly. Admiral Chang's voice suddenly filled every communication channel in the system. His words were calm and polite, but they carried a threat that made even Kim feel scared. Carrack's forces, this is the Earth Defense Force 7th Fleet. You have 60 seconds to release all Yolani prisoners and withdraw from this system. This is your only warning. On the Carrack's command ship, General Deckfer looked at his screens and started laughing. His officers joined in, their harsh voices echoing through their bridge. The Carracks had 81 ships compared to the humans' 27. Their dreadnoughts were twice as big as the largest human vessel. Their weapons were more powerful. Their armor was thicker. Tiny human insects, General Deckfer broadcast back, his voice full of contempt. You're outnumbered 3-1. Surrender now, and we will kill you quickly. Continue this foolishness, and we will take you alive for our slave pits." The other Carrack's commanders laughed harder. Some of them started moving their ships toward the humans, confident that this would be an easy victory. They had destroyed entire fleets before. These humans would be no different. Admiral Chang's response came exactly 60 seconds later. His voice was still calm, but now it carried the coldness of deep space. "Copy that," he said. "All ships, weapons free. Show them why the galaxy learned to fear us." What happened next was not a battle by any normal definition. It was the systematic destruction of everything the Carracks thought they knew about warfare. The human ships moved like they were controlled by a single mind. Instead of staying at long range and firing missiles like civilized species, they charged straight at the enemy. Captain Dongwu Nam's destroyer Bazan's Fury accelerated to full speed and aimed directly at a Carrack's cruiser twice its size. "He's going to ram them," gasped Engineer Choi. "That's suicide." But at the last second, Bazan's Fury spun in a tight spiral, its weapons firing continuously. The destroyer carved through the enemy formation like a drill through wood, leaving 3 Carrack ships burning in its wake. The ship that should have been destroyed was already attacking its next target. Other human vessels were doing things that made no sense. The cruiser Inchin's hammer was flying upside down, using its main engines as weapons to burn through enemy armor. The destroyer Guangzhou's Vengeance had deliberately crashed into a Carrack ship. But instead of exploding, it had deployed boarding parties that were fighting their way through the enemy vessel from the inside. Commander Yujin Kang led her Marines through the corridors of a Carrack's command ship like a virus spreading through a body. The Carracks had never faced enemies who fought hand-to-hand combat in the vacuum of space. They had never seen soldiers who used their own damaged ships as weapons. The humans turned their disadvantages into advantages. When their ships were damaged, they used the wreckage as projectiles. When they were outnumbered, they attacked from all directions at once. When they were outgunned, they got close enough to use smaller weapons that could penetrate enemy armor. Captain Su Young Huang's Soul's Wrath moved through the battle like death itself. It fired at 3 different targets simultaneously while ramming a 4th. When a Carrack's dreadnought tried to destroy it with a massive energy beam, the human ship used its own hull as a shield to protect 2 smaller vessels, then counterattacked while its armor was still glowing red-hot. The Carracks, who had been laughing minutes before, were now screaming orders and retreating in panic. But there was nowhere to run. The humans had surrounded them completely, and they were not interested in accepting surrender. The battle was over in less than 2 hours. Dr. Kim floated in his observation chair, staring out at the space around Haven's Rest, where once there had been a proud Carrack's fleet of 81 warships. Now there was only floating debris. Twisted metal drifted slowly through the darkness. Broken hull pieces tumbled end over end. Emergency lights blinked weakly on destroyed ship sections before their power finally died. Not a single Carrack's vessel had escaped. The human ships moved through the wreckage like sharks after a feeding frenzy. They were hunting down escape pods. And small craft that had tried to flee when the battle turned bad for the Carracks. Kim watched as the destroyer Isan's Fury caught up with a fleeing Carrack shuttle. There was a brief flash of weapons fire, then nothing but more debris. "There. Not taking prisoners," whispered Navigator Lee. Kim understood why. The Carracks had shown no mercy to the Yilani. They had enslaved children and murdered civilians. The humans were simply returning the favor. On the surface of Haven's Rest, rescue operations had already begun. Human transport ships landed near the slave camps, their engines still hot from battle. Marines in black armor moved quickly to free the Yilani prisoners. Kim watched through his ship's sensors as families were reunited. As medical teams treated the wounded, as food and supplies were distributed to people who had been starving, but there was something different about how the humans worked. They moved with mechanical efficiency, like machines programmed for war. They spoke to each other in short, clipped sentences. They showed no emotion, even when helping crying children or wounded elders. Admiral Minho Chang stood on the bridge of the Carrack's flagship Death's Crown, now a conquered ruin. Her uniform was torn in several places, and dried blood stained her sleeves. "Out her." The bodies of Carrick's officers lay where they had fallen during the hand-to-hand fighting that had taken control of the ship. Chang was not a large woman. She was maybe 40 years old, with graying hair and tired eyes. But when she moved, everyone around her stepped aside. When she spoke, everyone listened immediately. She had the presence of someone who had seen too much death and had learned to live with it. Dr. Kim received permission to transport down to the planet's surface. He wanted to see the rescue operations for himself and to speak with the Yolani survivors. His small shuttle landed near what had once been Haven's Rest's main city. The destruction was worse up close. Buildings that had stood for centuries were now piles of rubble. Gardens that had taken decades to grow were burned to ash. The smell of smoke and death hung in the air like a heavy blanket, but among the ruins, something beautiful was happening. Human medics were working side by side with Yolani doctors to treat the wounded. Engineers were setting up temporary shelters for families who had lost their homes. Soldiers were sharing their food rations with hungry children. The contrast was startling. These same humans who had just destroyed an entire fleet with ruthless efficiency were now showing incredible gentleness to the people they had rescued. Elder Yethkul approached Kim near a medical station where human doctors were treating Yolani survivors. The old Yolani's blue skin was pale with exhaustion, and his large eyes were filled with emotions Kim couldn't quite identify. "Dr. Kim," the elder said quietly, "I want to thank you for calling them, but I must ask, your species. They fight like demons." Kim watched a human marine carefully lift a wounded Yolani child onto a stretcher. The same hands that had probably killed dozens of Carrick's warriors an hour ago were now gentle enough to handle an injured baby. "They do," Kim replied. "But there are demons." Admiral Chang appeared beside them without making a sound. Up close, Kim could see that she was older than he had thought, maybe 50. Her face was marked with scars, and her eyes held the weight of many battles. But when she looked at the rescued Yolani families, something soft flickered in those hard eyes. Elder Yethkul turned to face the Admiral. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why did your people come? You've been isolated for 30 years? These were not your people being enslaved? This was not your fight?" Shang was quiet for a long moment, watching human soldiers help elderly Yolani walk to the medical stations. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of ancient truth. Because when the helpless cry out in the darkness, demons like us come roaring out of hell itself. She looked directly at the elder, her eyes as hard as winter steel. "We may be monsters, but we're monsters who choose to protect rather than prey." Over the next several days, human ships escorted groups of liberated Yolani back to their homeworlds. The rescue fleet grew as more human vessels arrived from the Sol system. They brought supplies, medical equipment, and construction materials to help rebuild what the Carrick's had destroyed. Word of the battle spread quickly through the galaxy. News. Reporters struggled to understand how 2007 human ships had completely destroyed a Kayak's fleet 3 times their size. Military analysts studied the recordings, trying to figure out the human tactics. But the message was clear to anyone who bothered to listen. Humanity had returned to the galaxy, and they had not grown soft during their 30 years of isolation. In the depths of space, predators of all kinds learned once again that Earth's children were the apex hunters of the cosmos. The Carrick's dominion, what remained of it, would think twice before targeting the defenseless again.